This is Believe in Buckeyes. I'm Bryant with All-American quarterback Chimdi Chekwa. This show is brought to you guys by FanDuel. And today we have a guest, a very special guest, a guy that knows a lot about Ohio State football. And Bill, how you doing? What's going on?
I'm good, Brian. How are you? Good to see you, Chimdi.
Doing all right. Now, we had Bill on the show. He recently released a book, Buckeye Brotherhood, where he outlines the 2024 National Championship team at Ohio State. He's also a beat writer on Substack. So he's a true Buckeye, in and out. And Bill, I've been hearing that the book is having a lot of success.
Yeah, I'm very pleased by the response to it. It was released in October and almost, I don't say immediately, but very quickly sold out of the hardcover books. We rushed a paperback version into print, and fortunately that was available at Christmas. Amazon kind of dropped the ball, so people who got kind of let down by Amazon, very sorry. I've tried to make it up to people. I've had them email me, and I'm trying to send out books to them from my personal supply. But no, the response has been really good. Gotten a lot of compliments about it, and it's, for people who, everyone knows what happened that season, obviously, but they don't know the how and the why. And in this book really digs beneath the surface and gets to the personal stories of the people involved. And to me, that's the heart of the book. It's the people stories.
Yeah, I think it is, man. It gets all the way down into individuals' process from recruiting, some of the challenges players dealt with throughout their time at Ohio State, and also gives you some backstory on how those challenges and that development really shaped who they were and how they all came together. I'm curious, kind of your process in digging up the story, talking to different individuals and gathering that. What was that process like over?
Yeah, it was very intense. It had to be done in 4 months because we knew we had to get the book out during football season. Now, fortunately, I'd done this twice before. I wrote a book on the 2012 Ohio State team, Buckeye Rebirth. And I thought, okay, that's my one and only book. I did it, done. Nice to be an author. And now I can go back to being a normal writer. And then the 2014 season happened. I thought, well, if I wrote a book about a season that didn't really have a conclusion, I have to write about that one. Okay, now I'm done. And then actually a couple of years ago, Cardale Jones and their publisher asked me to help him write his autobiography. So I did that. I think, okay, now I'm done. And then the 24 season happened. So I knew what was involved. I knew how to do it. Fortunately, the transcription services, the transcription apps are a lot better now than they were then. So I didn't have to do nearly as much transcribing as I did a decade ago, which helped a lot. But I really knew that I had to dig deep and really get the personal stories. My first interview was with Nina Day, about a week after the national championship game. We met at a coffee shop in Powell, suburb of Columbus. And I knew after that 2-hour interview that I was onto something. She was really insightful about what it was like to grow up in Manchester, New Hampshire for her and Ryan Day. And that kind of gave me a foundation. I ended up interviewing probably 50 some people, reporting and writing at the same time. I'd get enough reporting done to write that chapter, and then I'd keep building. Like, I didn't talk to Will Howard until like the week before the NFL draft, about a month before my manuscript was due. So I always kind of compare it to being like a chef who has to throw the dish in the oven and then throw in ingredients. Hope it doesn't ruin the meal. So I would love to like have a year to write a book and do it like a normal way. But again, I've done this twice before. I kind of know how to do it. At least for me, and I've talked to other writers, authors that have gone through the process. And for me, it's like, okay, this sucks. Because I always see the holes and the flaws and what you don't have and where does this fit. And if you're lucky toward the end of the process, you go, oh, okay, it doesn't suck. And then maybe when you're done and you can read it with fresh eyes, you think, okay, that was pretty good. And that's where I got. And then that's been reinforced by the people who've read it. My editor was happy with it. And again, the people who've read it, the Amazon reviews have been really good. And so it makes it all worth it. Nobody should write a book these days for the money. And, obviously you get paid, but you could probably make more working on McDonald's per hour. But to see the response to it and to see the finished product and to know that people enjoyed it. And then in 50 years from now, if somebody wants to know, how did they win that championship in 24? This book, might be out there. That's pretty gratifying.
Yeah, no, that's always good to hear. Yeah, so obviously you got very in-depth information on, a lot of teams, but definitely the most successful teams in recent history out of Ohio State. And I don't know, I'm big. I just kind of, every team is different year from year, But how would you compare, like maybe the 14 team that was national championship to our 2014? We also was able to win it all. Obviously, much different players, different coach. But how would you kind of look at those teams and would you say they compare and how they differ about how they went about getting it done?
Probably the biggest difference is that in 14, the expectations were really low after Braxton Miller hurt his shoulder in training camp. I mean, people thought the season was over. I think they were number 5 in the preseason polls that year. And then when Braxton got hurt, they dropped to something like 14 after the first week. And then they, of course, lose to Virginia Tech. And you think, they're done. Everyone wrote them off. Uh,
Yeah.
Took that 59-0 win against Wisconsin to get in the playoff. Last year, or the 2014, there were such high expectations, such high. I mean, they were number 2 preseason behind Georgia. Right? It was Georgia, yeah. But it was pretty clear that, I mean, they were all in. They got the transfers, Will Howard and Caleb Downs and Quinshon Judkins, Seth McLaughlin, and this was the year. Those guys all came back. Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, all those guys came back to beat Michigan, to win a Big Ten, and most of all, win a national championship. And so the expectations were sky high. But the funny thing about Ohio State is, I think 12 times since, I forget exactly when, 12 times they'd been number 1 or number 2 preseason. None of those teams won the national championship. Every national championship Ohio State has won kind of came out of nowhere. The 68 team, bunch of sophomores, nobody expected that much out of them. 2002, as you know, that was, they were written off a lot. And then 14, we just talked about. 24 had the pressure of, you better win it. If you don't win it, it's all for nothing. And then they lose to Michigan, and they don't get to go in the Big Ten championship, which put even more pressure on them in the playoff. And the thing is, they didn't play like a national championship team until the playoff.
Until the
Right?
playoffs.
There were glimpses of it. There were times they looked really good, but they lost to Oregon. They had the disastrous upset to Michigan. Nebraska was a close call. They didn't look great. Penn State was a close call. It wasn't until the playoff. And I remember watching the Tennessee game in the first quarter going, where have these guys been all year? Right? I mean, they just blew the doors off Tennessee. And I thought, this is what I was going to see in September, October, November. Well, they saved it for the right time.
Now, and what a lot of people have talked about is that meeting after the Michigan game, right? And kind of attributing a lot of that playoff run to the adversity they faced coming out of Michigan. How much do you credit that as the inspiration for the run? Or how much do you credit just them just having a better understanding of the pieces that they have and the best approach to actually go on that run? I'm curious your perspective on that.
I think it was both, because they had that meeting. It was 3 days after the Michigan game. Ryan Day met with his leadership group on that Monday, and they started to hash things out. Obviously, it'd been a disastrous game. The play calling was certainly criticized, and justifiably so. They were as demoralized a team as you'll ever see. I mean, the first goal was to beat Michigan. They lost the previous 3 years. Wasn't any good that year. They were shocked that they lost that game and how they lost that game. But during that meeting with the leaders, they decided we need to meet with the whole team, just Ryan Day and no other coaches and the team. And yeah, I wrote this. People told me one team walked in the door and a different team walked out because they hashed everything out. They unburdened themselves. If anybody had anything to say to anybody else on the team, they said it. They went at Ryan Day. Ryan Day went at them. It was never personal, but it was no holds barred. It was, okay, we have to be completely honest here and say what happened and how we're going to fix it. And they decided, okay, we're going to change the blocking scheme. We have a makeshift offensive line now. We have to change the way we block. Ryan Day agreed with the players. We've got to be more aggressive. That Michigan game, they kept running into the defensive line. That was Michigan's one strength, right? Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. You'll know if you read the book what exactly happened. There were some players on the offensive line that should not have been in the game because they were hurt. And Will Howard was not anywhere close to 100% either. So if you read that chapter of that particular game, you understand it better why they lost. But they knew that, okay, now we've lost Michigan. We're not going to get a chance to play in the Big Ten for the Big Ten championship. We have one thing left. And if we don't win that, then we all came back for nothing. And Ryan Day, or Lena Day was ready to move. They were ready to move. I mean, Ohio State was not going to fire him. I mean, Ross Bjork told me when I was with the Dispatch, we're not firing him. But I think the days would have been, I mean, they didn't want to stay. I mean, who would want to stay and get the abuse that they got? It was sickening. Death threats. RJ Day, then 16-year-old son, was getting death threats. I mean, it's one thing to criticize a coach. RJ had nothing to do with it. He's a kid. So if you're a parent, if you're a father and a mother and your kids are getting stuff at school, and they have two younger daughters who I don't know exactly what kind of abuse they got, but it was probably not pleasant. You got to look out for your kids' mental health, and they're mental health advocates. They
Yeah.
they had a responsibility to think, okay, do we have a future here? Should we have a future here? And fortunately, they had that run because Ohio State would be in a very different place right now if they hadn't made that run. Because if Ryan Day had left, who's their coach right now? What does this team look like? Do they lose? Does Julian Sands stay? Probably not. Does Jeremiah Smith stay? Who knows? You're talking about you don't want to think about that if you don't Ohio State. You really don't, because you have a good coach, and that run made all the difference. But in that meeting made all the difference because they all got together after Ryan Day left. G. Scott Jr., who had kind of become one of the spiritual leaders of the team, led a prayer, and player after player told me we were in tears. We had our arms around each other, and they were so united. They walked into that room a demoralized, angry team, and they walked out a completely united team, and that's what enabled that run to happen. Now, they still had to do it. They still had to beat Tennessee, Oregon, Texas, and Notre Dame, but that was the foundation for being able to do so.
Yeah, because it's interesting because obviously in your book you speak a lot about, like you say, the pressure, right? The pressure that Coach Day was feeling from Buckeye Nation, what he was feeling from himself, his upbringing, and like you say, the mental health side of things as well. What do you think, I guess, overall, the grand scheme, what do we have now in Coach Day now that he has that sigh of relief of being a national champion? And now this season beating Michigan to kind of show that he can do that as well. How does that help him in his future and his career as he go on and leading our team?
And because Ohio State didn't finish the deal, lost to Indiana and lost to Miami, I think the hunger is there. Oh, if they had repeated the national championship, who knows? But I know that he is motivated. I know that the team is motivated. Look, we've seen the turmoil that college football programs are under with NIL and the transfer portal. The last thing that Ohio State would want is to be transitioning to a new coach. It's just you need stability. And Ohio State has really three kind of pillars. They have Ryan Day, they have Nick Marotti, strength coach, and Mark Pantoni, the general manager. And Mark Pantoni's job has changed so much. You could do an entire show on him. He's in charge of kind of deciding, who, I don't say who stayed in, but like valuation. Because now you can't just be a college player to muddle along for 4 years and maybe you find yourself in your third or fourth year. I mean, we saw the number of players that transferred out of Ohio State. And so it's a produce now kind of world. And to have a proven coach, one that does have the weight of not having won a national championship off his shoulders, I think is huge. And he's, as long as Ryan Day's at Ohio State, he'll be able to get elite quarterbacks and elite wide receivers, because wide receivers want to play for elite quarterbacks. And so, and if you can keep Matt Patricia long term or semi long term, I don't think that's, like he's not going to be in 5 years. I'd be very surprised at least. But you could get a guy like that who could run the defense in a highly professional way, then Ohio State's going to still be an elite program. But we saw from last year, look at the teams that didn't even make the playoff. You know, I mean, Texas didn't, Michigan didn't, Penn State didn't, all these programs, LSU didn't. And you see the turmoil that those programs have. Alabama lost in the first round. Ohio State's the only program in the country that's never had an extended dip. But nothing's guaranteed. And so stability is really important. And to keep Ryan Day happy and to have that stability in the program is crucial.
Yeah, that stability is interesting. So you go to the book and you have a group of guys, and I love the journey of each individual player because they had the COVID year. Ryan Day recruited a lot of these guys that are on this championship team. You had a few transfers, Caleb Downs, you have Will Howard come in, but you had a lot of veterans. You had guys who could have went to a ton of guys who could have went to NFL and stayed. And you had some key guys transfer in. Stability or that ability to continue to compete year after year, our roster is looking a lot different than what it used to look like, right? It used to be that all these 5-star guys are on the bench. Now a lot of them are going and chasing other opportunities elsewhere because there's an opportunity to do that. How do you view Ohio State moving forward in maybe a smaller roster, maybe veterans and young guys, but not a lot in between like you had on the national championship team? Do you feel like their ability to compete at that same level is sustainable, or is it there's some some questions as to how they maintain this roster and compete at the same level?
Well, I think everyone's trying to figure out the answer to that. I don't think that there is an answer right now because there's such chaos and anarchy in college football right now. And we saw what Dabo Sweeney said about players, accusing Ole Miss of tampering and taking one of their players. It's chaos, and there's no college commissioner. The NCAA is largely kind of toothless, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
who's running the show? That's with nobody in some ways. I think what you're going to find, and you saw it this year with the transfer portal, Ohio State lost 31 players. Now, some of those were kind of pushed out. I'm not going to identify which because I'm not sure which one, but I think we can guess which ones were kind of shown the door. And then others hadn't proven themselves, but wanted a lot in NIL or a revenue share. The revenue share is a finite pie. You could get more with the NIL with some of the marketing deals, but the revenue share from the school is what it is. Ohio State, every school gets $20.5 million, and football gets a large chunk of that, but not all of that. And you got to divvy it up. And you know that, okay, Julian Sands is going to get paid. Jeremiah Smith's going to get paid. You got to pay your guys who are actually starters. It's the guys who haven't proven it, they're going to suffer or go elsewhere. I mean, I think Ohio State would love to have Quincy Porter back, for example. He's clearly a talented guy, might have made an impact this year. But I don't think, and again, I don't know the particulars of his case. I'm just throwing his name out there. Well, let's just say he was asking for X figure, and Ohio State said, well, we can only give you this. And he says, well, my agent says I'm worth this. Well, your agent might be right and might be wrong, and there's no way to know. And that's the thing. Ohio State's just guessing what the market is. Because let's say he ended up at Notre Dame. Maybe Notre Dame decided he was worth, $500,000 or $1 million, whatever it might be. And Ohio State said, no, we think you're worth 300 or whatever. I mean, those are not real numbers, but just, so what's market value? Whatever the market says it is, or whatever the agent believes. And now the agent could be bluffing. And look, there are going to be guys in the portal that are going to regret that decision. And if you look at the guys that left Ohio State in the past, very few have panned out at other schools. It's remarkable how few of those guys have made impact elsewhere. I'm not saying that's not the case because I think this group that left is probably a better quality of player. I think Quincy Porter is going to be a good player. I think some of those guys are legitimately good players. But Ohio State just didn't have the money, at least in the revenue share part of it, to say, okay, we're going to pay you who hasn't proven yourself over this guy who is a starter. They kept Kenyatta Jackson, for example. I don't know what his price tag was, but Ohio State probably decided I'd rather pay Kenyatta Jackson, a proven performer, this amount than give it to a guy who hasn't. So you're going to lose players. And that's why they filled them with veteran players. So you lose those guys, but you replace them with an Earl Little Jr. who produced at Florida State, a Terry Moore who was a really good player before he got hurt at Duke, and guys like that. They're going to have the core of players that they recruit and develop and pay, but they're going to supplement that with proven guys that they can just kind of plug and play. It's going to be harder for a guy to just kind of develop and stay for 3 or 4 years and then finally blossom as a senior. I think those are going to be rarities. I told Ryan Day, I interviewed him a couple of weeks ago about this whole NIL stuff. And I said, I don't think I'll ever, if I ever write another book, I don't think I'll ever be able to use the title Buckeye Brotherhood again. A class of a team that's stuck together for 4 or 5 years. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be a team, I don't want to say mercenaries, but there is that element to it. Okay, right? I mean, they're not technically employees, but that it's going to be a year-to-year proposition for these players.
Yeah, they're hired to do a job.
And obviously, right. And it's funny is that I don't think no one likes it, but like you say, that's just where we're at. That's just
reality.
That's how things are. So I guess this is and you don't know the answer to this, but this is a hypothetical. So with some schools fighting back, right? You're starting to see some guys get into the portal, and you're starting to see lawsuits kind of firing up. Like, well, you get into the portal, you owe us this. Like, it was in the contract, you owe us this type of money. Do you think that's the future? That's how you try to bring some type of regulation to all that what's going on, and guys just kind of coming and going as they please?
I think at some point it'll get so bad that the schools, the conferences will get together and say, we've got to have some kind of, I mean, I think federal regulation is the natural. In a perfect world, you say, okay, let's have federal regulation so there's a uniform set of rules for all 50 states. Because right now it's state by state. I mean,
Yeah.
Ohio rushed in NIL legality in 2021. I mean, we know this is a fairly dysfunctional state politically, but they got that passed like that because, oh my God, if Ohio State is at a disadvantage with the Alabamas and the Georgias and the Texases of the world, we can't have that. So they got
Yeah.
that legislation passed, but it's a state
Priorities.
by state proposition. So you need nationally to have a national set of guidelines. That's a challenge, obviously, getting federal legislation passed with anything is, and this will be no exception. There is no college commissioner. I don't think there will be. Haven't seen that kind of push. The NCAA is, as we talked about, not what it used to be in terms of enforcement. So I think it's going to have to get to a point where schools programs get so fed up that they say, okay, we gotta have this meeting, some kind of, convention and say, we got to come up with rules here. When that's going to be, when that tipping point comes, I have no idea. I guess there is still a chance that federal legislation could be passed. And I think that would be the best option, but I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, I mean, football is still tied to school and the school year and the school calendar. I mean, they have the transfer portal, but
Right.
realistically, a player could just unenroll in school and enroll in another school, and he's a student at another
That's right.
school. So
That's right.
there
You can get around the transfer portal too, right.
so there's just so much limitations on how they can control it without actually having a real regulation. I wanted to talk about the quarterbacks because what I thought was interesting was Will Howard, bringing in Will Howard, him still having to develop. I thought one thing was interesting. He said he dropped back and took a couple hitches and tried to throw the deep ball at Jeremiah Smith, and he was like 10 yards too short. And then Julian saying, the other thing I thought was interesting was in recruiting Julian saying as he, transferring from Alabama, Coach Day and staff basically being transparent and saying, like, we don't have any more NIL left, really. I'm curious from Julian Saying's standpoint and what you gather from that, those discussions, his draw to come to Ohio State and, was it Coach Day's development? Was it just, Ohio State in general, the opportunity? And is that something from a quarterback standpoint, certain positions, receiver, quarterback, and others, from a quarterback standpoint, that's something that Ohio State has advantage at when it comes to Ryan Day and developing quarterback?
Yeah. I mean, people know that Julian Sand signed with Alabama, was at Alabama. And then, of course, Nick Saban retired. Well, Ohio State wants to thank one person for the national championship. They might want to start with Nick Saban because there's no Caleb Downs, there's no Seth McLaughlin, there's no Julian Sand if he doesn't
Yeah.
retire. You're right. Julian Sand came to Ohio State with very little NIL, but the family understood that. Look, I think what's going to be more and more important is that families take the long view and delay instant gratification because I'm sure Julian Sand could have gone somewhere else and gotten more money off the bat. But he took the long view and realized, look, Ryan Day can develop quarterbacks. I could have great receivers. I can sit and learn for a year behind Will Howard. Then I'll take my chances. And it's obviously worked out for him. So I think that approach, Julian Sand is a smart guy. He understands what Ryan Day can do for him. He had the year of learning behind Will Howard, which was huge. Yeah, I think for quarterbacks especially, it really is important to take the long view. And I think that look, he was a redshirt freshman last year, and I don't want to say he got exposed in the postseason. That's an overstatement. It wasn't like he played poorly at all. But if you look at who was in the national championship game, it was Fernando Mendoza, who was a fifth-year guy,
Good.
and Carson Beck, who I don't think's great, but was a long-time college quarterback at Georgia, then Miami. And I know that there are plays that when Julian Sand looks at the tape, especially against Miami, he would like back. Well, he was starting his 12th and 13th games, or 13th and 14th games. Those guys are starting maybe their 50th. There's a huge difference between a 20-year-old and a 23 or 24-year-old. There's a huge
Yeah.
difference. And that's one of the reasons I think Ohio State adopted this kind of transfer portal strategy. They don't want to rely on a bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds. It's one thing to have a Jeremiah Smith. He's a generational talent. You get a Jeremiah Smith, you pay whatever you got to pay, and you develop it, and you're just thrilled you have it. But most mortals are, take time to develop, especially linemen, right? Offensive linemen take a long time to develop. And so I think it's really important. I think Ohio State has come to the conclusion that it is important to have veteran guys to be leaders and guys that don't have to be like physically and mentally developed as much as freshmen and sophomores do.
Yeah, I think it was always interesting that, for this 25 season, obviously we win the national championship in 24, but we lose a ton of guys. And then almost by, just due to scheduling, us playing Texas week 1 and us beating Texas, we're essentially the number 1 team all season. But, like you say, we got a first-year starter in Julian Sayin. We got a new defense that played fantastic, but it's a new defense when it still comes down to it. Now we're looking at Julian Sayin with a year on his belt and going into, year 2 of being a full-time starter. What do you feel is his next steps? Is the pressure now really set for Ohio State to go on that run to win another national championship? It's not fair to say due to now him having a little more tenure under his belt.
Yeah, there's always pressure on Ohio State to win a national championship. You have Jeremiah Smith, you have Julian Sayin, you still have some really good players on defense. He lost a lot on defense. I mean, let's face it, they lost a lot. You could have like, let's see, of the guys. These guys could go in the top 10 of the draft: Parnell Tate, Arvell Reese, Caleb Downs. I've seen some with Sonny Styles in that range. You could have 4 guys. And I think Cade McDonald is going to be a first-round pick too. So those guys are not easy to replace. But you look at the positions and you go, okay, I don't see a lot of holes. The offensive line should be better because they're almost all back. I think the next step for Julian Sayin probably is to realize that he can run more. He can scramble more. There were a couple plays that when I looked at the tape against Miami and especially Indiana, he could have taken off and moved the chains. Look, he's not Will Howard. He's not 6'5" and 230 pounds. He's 6'1" and 10 pounds. But he's not a statue back there. He feels the pressure really well. I think that next year you'll see him run for first downs more often to keep the chains moving. I think he was so intent on throwing the ball, and he's good at that. He's good at rolling out, avoiding pressure, and throwing on the run accurately. It's a good. I'm not knocking him. But there are times where instead of making that throw that's maybe a 60%, 50% chance of completion, he can run it. It's a 100% chance. And then you live for another day and you then get more chances. But in terms of accuracy, I don't think he can improve much more. I mean what was his completion percentage? 79%. I mean, it's insane.
Right. I think it's a record, right?
He can make every throw. He feels the pocket well. But I think the legs are the thing that is probably the next step, knowing when to run. It's not going to be a lot. He's not going to be a guy that runs 10, 15 times a game. But if it's 5 times at the right time, then that can be really helpful.
And any indication that Coach Day doesn't coach players, quarterbacks to take off and run, right? Because I don't know. It just seems like Will Howard didn't do it as much as he did at Kansas State. C.J. Stroud rarely took off,
Right.
but he's really capable. And Fields, I mean, considering what he's capable of doing, rarely actually took off that much as well. I mean, in NFL, he ran 10 times more, and maybe that might be because the defense is a little more. But maybe to avoid injury during the season or something, you think they're less encouraged, at least during the season, maybe not so much in the playoffs, but during the season, not.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that they definitely take the long view of a season. That's why they slowed the pace so much. They weren't trying to score 50 last year. They were just trying to get in the 30s, have a comfortable lead and get out of there. And I think what hurt Ohio State to some degree last year was, other than Texas, they weren't challenged at all in the regular season. I mean, they just weren't. Michigan is a challenge. It was maybe more of a psychological challenge, but Michigan wasn't very good. And, when you look at it, and Penn State obviously was not what we thought they would be. Illinois was good, but certainly not on Ohio State's level. So I remember asking Ryan Day during that stretch in November when it was Purdue, UCLA, and Rutgers. Are you worried you're not getting challenged? You haven't faced adversity, and he said no because we practiced so hard, and I think it did hurt them. I think when they got in the game, that game against Indiana, and Indiana had been in some close games, and Ohio State hadn't, and I think it showed. So, next year with the schedule they have, they're going to be in close games. I mean, the one thing that Ohio State fans should recognize is if they go 10-2 next year, that's a hell of a season. You have 6 really tough games. You play on the road at Texas, at Iowa, at USC. What's the other one? Oh, at Indiana, only the national champion. And then you got Oregon, which might be the preseason number 1, and Michigan at home. That's 6 games that you could lose. And so if you go 10-2, that's pretty good. If you go 11-1 or 12-0, I mean, there ought to be no criticism. Good luck with that. But to your point, Chimdi, I do think that they take a more conservative approach with quarterbacks running the ball during the regular season, just because they know it's going to be a long season. They want to preserve those guys. So I think the key with all this is timing. In the big games, if Julian Sand needs to take off and get that first down, then he needs to do it. But I think they have to be very careful about the timing of that stuff.
Okay. Chim, you got any final questions?
No, nothing else. I mean, I did have one more, and you kind of hit on it with the competition early on. I don't even know this is a question. It might be a statement for me more so in that I do feel like the competition benefits or hurts our coaching staff more than even the players. Because when you look at that national championship year that you wrote about, the Oregon game, what was the big issue? The defense not getting lined up, the play calls coming in late, a little bit too much complexity. And then after that, they talked about they kind of changed the game plans for each week. And then the Michigan game, a little bit too much running, too much trying to establish, the run game, and they switched it up. And I think not being able to see your team against some of those more competitive teams, it's harder to really know what you're good at. And even you go back to this year in the Indiana game, early pick thrown by Julian Sain, it really was a scheme thing where defense kind of felt what they were doing. They schemed it up early on and got the pick. Then you get the same thing versus Miami, a pick 6 in the first half. It's kind of like it's like, man, I wish you would have got threw that pick 6 on the screen earlier in the season because it would never happen again. That's for sure.
No, I think you're right. I mean, like I said, I think that they were hurt because they weren't challenged. And no team's going to win a national championship without facing adversity and being in a tough game and having to really dig deep. Look, Ohio State, if they don't miss a 27-yard field goal against Indiana, it probably goes to overtime. And they can win that game. They also, on the play before that, I mean, there's a play where Julian Sand had some options, and he ended up throwing to the tight end. He got broken up, and so they attempt the field goal. Against Miami, if that pick 6 doesn't happen, and that wasn't Julian Sand's fault, if that pick 6 doesn't happen, you could be looking at a 7-7 game. Is it 14-0? 14-0 against that defense? That's a hurdle, and they couldn't quite get over the hump. So, yeah, when you play a good team and you make mistakes, you put yourself in a bind, there's no guarantee you're going to overcome it. And they didn't. Do I think that Ohio State could have won the national championship last year? Of course. I mean, I would have liked their chances against Indiana in a rematch. You can say, I mean, who knows? We have no idea what would have happened. But I think the players felt after that game that they were the better team, but Indiana beat them that night. And they would have loved to have had another crack at Indiana. But look, give Indiana credit. I mean, 16-0, and that's you can do nothing but tip your cap to them. But it'll be a fascinating season this year because that issue will not be an issue this year. Not being challenged, they're going to get challenged. It starts with Texas in week 2.
Yeah, I got one last question. Listen, when Ohio State wins a national championship next season,
there you go.
What is going to be the title of the next book? That's my question. It's not going to be the.
It'll be How Ohio State Won the 26th Championship by Chimdi Chekwa.
There we go. There we go.
How's that?
2 books in 3 years. Just a man for the job. Just a man for the job. But once again, though, we want to thank you for your time. You joining us here on this evening and just talking some Buckeye football that we know and love. Obviously, your book is doing great. Please go out and catch your Buckeye Brotherhood at your local bookstores here in Ohio. Also, you could be found in Barnes & Noble. But, look hard. Good luck, because that thing is flying off the shelf. So great job, Bill.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And please follow me. I left the Columbus Dispatch in September. I took a buyout, left on good terms. It was just time. I'm now at billrabinowitz.substack.com. So if you would want a potential another book, then please support me, because the only way I can do it is if I can get paid subscriptions for me to continue covering the team. So that support would be invaluable. I look forward to covering the team another season. And thank you guys so much for having me on.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, we're going to end this show as we always do, Chum, with a nice OH.
Ayo.
Go Bucks. Talk to you guys soon.
Go Bucks.